In light of the presidential election results, Special Counsel Jack Smith and the Justice Department have concluded that the federal prosecutions of Donald for inciting an insurrection on January 6, 2021 cannot proceed. At Smith's request, DC federal judge Tanya Chutkan dismissed the January 6 case against Donald Trump. Although the case was dismissed with prejudice, which means it can be revived after Donald is no longer in office, this was still a very dark, if expected, turn. And I think it's worth remembering how elected Republicans reacted at the time, despite the fact that in the last 3 years, they've done everything in their power to normalize and further empower the man who put them in harm's way of the violent mob he set on the Capitol. Here's Kevin McCarthy immediately after the tragedy of January 6th.
Details of Republican leader Kevin McCarthy's conversations in the days after January 6th were reported by Jonathan Martin and Alexander Burns of the New York Times in their upcoming book, This Will Not Pass. McCarthy, according to the book, was so upset with Trump's behavior, he told fellow Republicans, quote, "I've had it with this guy." McCarthy flatly denied the reporting, tweeting, quote, "The New York Times reporting on me is totally false and wrong." And the Republican leader's spokesperson told the Times, quote, "McCarthy never said he'd call Trump to say he should resign." But overnight, the Times reporters released audio showing McCarthy did exactly that.
What I think I'm going to do is I'm going to call him.
This, according to the Times reporters, was during a phone call with House Republicans hosted by Liz Cheney just days after the attack on the Capitol.
Are you hearing that he might resign? Is there any reason to think that might happen?
I've had some few discussions. My gut tells me no. I'm seriously thinking of having that conversation with him tonight. I haven't talked to him in a couple days. From what I know of him, I mean, you guys all know him too. Do you think he'd ever back away? But
McCarthy goes on to say he believed Trump would be impeached and possibly even removed from office by the Senate.
The only discussion I would have with him is that I think this will pass, and it would be my recommendation we should resign. I mean, that would be my take, but I don't think he would take it, but I don't know.
McCarthy was in fear of his life on that day, but mere days after he claimed that Donald should resign, McCarthy traveled down to Mar-a-Lago and kissed Donald's ring, which began the process of rehabilitating Donald as a viable Republican candidate for the 2024 presidential nomination and the whitewashing, at least among Republicans, of this horrible crime. And then here's what then Majority Leader of the Senate, Mitch McConnell, had to say to justify his refusal to convict Donald in the Senate after he had already been impeached in the House.
There's no question, none, that President Trump is practically and morally responsible for provoking the events of the day. No question about it. The people who stormed this building believed they were acting on the wishes and instructions of their president. And having that belief was a foreseeable consequence of the growing crescendo of false statements, conspiracy theories, and reckless hyperbole, which the defeated president kept shouting into the largest megaphone on planet Earth.
I think it's also important to remember how American newspapers reacted to the attack on our Capitol. Back when the Fourth Estate actually believed that an attack on our government was something that needed to be taken seriously and for which Donald and those who carried out his wishes would be held accountable. So, unfortunately, despite all of that, it looks like Donald has gotten away with one of the greatest crimes against America. And that's not even taking into account the documents case. Remember, after he was no longer in office in 2021, he stole classified, highly sensitive documents that belonged to the American people and moved them to Mar-a-Lago. The documents case was doomed from the start because his personal pocket judge, Aileen Cannon, refused to let the case move forward, essentially, and then dismissed it. And then that's not even counting the New York case, for which Donald was actually convicted on 34 felony counts, but for which he will not be sentenced. Despite all of this, despite having gotten away scot-free, Donald is planning his revenge against those who tried to hold him accountable. Ron Filipkowski of the Midas Touch Network reported that he would not be shocked if Donald appoints somebody like the disgraced Matt Gaetz as the DOJ's special counsel to go after Michael Byrd, the Capitol police officer who shot and killed insurrectionist Ashli Babbitt. Just to give you some context, this incident occurred as Babbitt tried to climb through a window she and other insurrectionists smashed in order to gain access to the Capitol and attack members of Congress. Byrd was carrying out his duties to protect the Capitol and the people inside of it. In a normal, insane country, Donald's January 6th trial would have been completed in a timely manner. He would have been convicted for those crimes, just as 749 of his foot soldiers have been. And he would have been sentenced to a significant prison term, just as those who were convicted of sedition were, serving sentences in excess of 18 years in some cases. But in this country, our next president is the person who sent the mob to the Capitol to overturn the results of a free and fair election that he lost because he's a sore loser. And in his telling of the story, Donald is innocent and insurrectionist Ashli Babbitt is a hero. Quote, one thing that nobody had paid much attention to, but they should, is the fact that Donald and the people close to him have called for Capitol Police Officer Michael Byrd to be prosecuted for murder in the shooting death of Ashli Babbitt on January 6th. Filipkowski wrote, Donald could very easily have his DOJ open up an investigation and charge Byrd, and I would not be shocked if that happens. Unquote. I wouldn't be shocked either. We know my uncle is dedicated to rewriting the history of his attempted coup. He's even directed Pam Bondi, his latest attorney general nominee, to investigate the 2020 election for fraud that does not exist, which is quite honestly insane. Donald is determined to force his delusions onto the rest of us, or at least onto those people who are willing to accept them in place of truth. And if he needs to use the Justice Department in order to do that successfully, he will. We also know that Donald is an ardent defender of the mob of thugs he sent to assault police officers and end our tradition of peaceful transfer of power. In January 2023, in order to mark the second anniversary of the insurrection, Donald said this, and I quote, Ashli Babbitt's mother was arrested yesterday because she was protesting the death of her daughter being shot by a lunatic for no reason. So she loses her daughter, and then on top of it, she gets arrested, and we are not going to let this go on. These people are horrible, horrible people. What they've done to protesters, these are protesters. They were protesting a dishonest election, unquote. Every word of that is a lie. The horrible, horrible people he's referring to are the Capitol police officers who saved the lives of countless members of Congress and their staffers. Michael Byrd is not a lunatic. He was carrying out his duty as a Capitol police officer. Ashli Babbitt was breaking the law. So we know that Donald is planning to pardon the January 6th terrorists, whom he now refers to as protesters, and likely prosecute those who prosecuted them. But we also know who's responsible for putting Michael Byrd in the position he was in on January 6th. We know that Byrd was only doing the job he swore to do, which was to protect the Capitol and all those worked within it. Regardless of the disastrous consequences of the failures of the Republican Party and Merrick Garland and the corrupt, illegitimate supermajority of the Supreme Court, the least we can do is remember what actually happened on that day and remember the rest of those who sacrificed and suffered. Hey, everybody. In case you weren't aware, I am spectacularly bad at self-promotion. So Here goes. Please subscribe to our channel and like and share our videos. Your support means so much to all of us. Thank you.